Hi, good evening guys. Welcome to the Eli-b Create and Sew live sew along. Tonight I'm going to be teaching you how to make a summer skirt with an elasticated waistband, nice and gathered up into the waist. We're even going to do pockets. So for those of you who are sewing along, hi Karen, lovely to see you on. I have sent over, for those of you who requested the pocket pattern pieces, sent those over and asked you to cut out the physical paper pattern pieces in advance. So we have our adult pocket piece, and I'm going to be doing a child size skirt. So I've got the child size. Hi Wendy, hi Claire, hi Anita, Anna, hello. There's a few of you joining on, which is lovely to see. And it was wonderful to see all the fabric selections that you were making for your skirt. So tonight's about having fun, learning a couple new techniques, and ending up with a skirt that you can wear in the nice warm weather. So, hi Angela. So we're going to get started. So in the video that I posted earlier this week, I mentioned how you were going to be cutting out your skirt panel pieces. So you were going to be, if you wanted a nice flared and full skirt, then you were going to be cutting out two lengths. I am making a full length, quite a full skirt for my daughter. So I've used all of the width of the fabric. If you wanted to have your skirt a little bit more slimmer line, then you would have needed to cut off some of the side seams, because what we don't want to do is put our pockets in and then realize, whoopsie, our skirt's a bit too full. So if you kind of feel, oh, you're not too sure, send me a message. But ideally, you're going to be kind of just grabbing it, rouging it up in front of you and seeing, yeah, do you think that that's going to be enough for the front? And then obviously your idea is that the duplicate will be at the back. I'm glad you're excited, Sally. Okay, so we're going to get stuck in, as I said, on cutting the pockets out. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into that. And the reason that I didn't want you to cut the pockets out at home was because I wanted to go over a couple techniques, like checking your grain lines, because grain lines are really important to follow and get right when you are sewing. So I've got my cutting mat over here. I'm going to tilt the camera down now so you can see what I'm doing, and the idea is that you follow on at home as well. Hi Angela. So right, let's put that like that. Okay, right, hopefully you can all see that. Okay, so I've taken my fabric, so I'm going to be needing two pairs of pockets. Okay, so I've cut one out. I think I did suggest that if you wanted to, you could have cut two out, so it makes your laying and cutting easier. So firstly, what I'm going to do is I've got some fabric left over here, so I'm going to fold over what I think I'm going to need to be able to cut out two pockets. Now Lizzie's are really small, so I'm kind of looking roughly from my selvage in. Okay, that will do me one and that will do me two. So what I need to do is I need to measure from my selvage edge here with a tape measure to the fold. Okay, and I've got to check that measurement is parallel. Hi Jill. So I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to measure from the selvage edge all the way to the fold. So I've got 29 at the top. I'm going to bring my piece of fabric up and I'm going to measure at the bottom, right on the edge to the fold. Now that's 29.5. So that tells me that my fabric's a bit skew and I need to correct it. So I'm going to just bring this down a fraction, walk the fabric over, and we're going to measure again. So we're measuring from the edge at the top, 29, and at the bottom I now have 29. Okay, awesome. So I know that my selvage is parallel to the folded edge. Okay, so that they measure the same. Now what you would do is you're going to take your pattern piece and you want to make sure that when you position it on your fabric, now I'm going to fold this over again so that I can get a nice clean an easy cut. So I've got a selvage edge here, and I know that from selvage to fold, it's the same. So I'm going to fold my fabric over again. If you've got 2 pattern pieces, what you're going to do is leave your fabric open. You're going to position your first pattern piece and you're going to position your second pattern piece, okay? I'm going to fold it in half. You can also do it this way. And again, I'm going to just double check that from my fold to this fold is the same measurement. So I'm just a little bit off, okay? Right. 14 and a half, 14 and a half. Okay, super. Now I can see my selvage edge over here. Okay, and I'm going to place my pocket bag onto the fabric like so. There we go. All right. And I'm going to position a pin at the top of my grain line, and I'm going to go through all of the layers of fabric. Okay, so I'm going to pin in and out, and you'll notice I'm pinning within my seam allowance. So that's the distance from the cut edge to that of my stitching line. I'm now going to measure to check that my grain line runs parallel with my selvage edge. This is the most important part, okay? It's just that by pinning it in line at the top, it enables me to pivot my pattern piece nicely so that I can make sure that is an accurate measurement. So I'm going to measure from the selvage to my grain line. So it's 8.5 centimeters at the top. And I'm going to check that it is 8.5. So I've just got to move that pattern piece ever so slightly. So it is now 8.5 centimeters from the selvage edge. Okay, so I've got that nice and parallel. So what I'm going to do now is just pop in a few extra pins, and you can do this at home with me. So we're just going to pin our pocket bag to the fabric all the way around. Okay. Okay, so once you've pinned that on, we're going to physically cut it out all the way around. And then you would see where you have these little black triangles all the way around the pocket bag. Those are known as notches, and they actually help you to stitch your pocket bag up correctly. So let's cut that out together. Okay. And you will notice that I now have another length of fabric left over, but I have a selvage edge, you see. So what I've done is I've just cut what I needed to enable me to cut my pockets out, and having that selvage left over means that if I wanted to cut anything else out of this, I have a selvage to use as a reference in future for my grain line. Now, knowing my daughter, she loves matchy everything, so she's probably going to want a matching scrunchie, and this will do perfectly what we have left here. So keep cutting out your pocket bags, okay, and then we're going to go around and just put in a few notches, okay, all the way around. Trouble with moving the camera is then you've got to kind of start all over again trying to get it right. So nice clean cuts around the curve. I hope so, Mary Ann. The plan is to try and upload the video to our YouTube channel, Eli-b Create and Sew, by Claire Watson on our YouTube channel. So we hope to, we try to post the videos after the live sew-alongs. So if you do miss anything, it'll be posted to our Facebook page and our Instagram page as well as YouTube. Okay, so because everyone isn't on Facebook anymore, so it used to be the cool thing, but for this purpose it does work really well. So I've cut out all the way around. Hi Cynthia, lovely to see you on. And we're now going to just snip into those little notches, okay? So literally I've made them very small on the pattern piece because the objective is not to cut too deeply into it. You're just doing a little snip, okay? So snip through all your layers like that. So you're just putting a little snip into the fabric. So go all the way around just where those little notches are, okay? And where these dots are, okay, this is basically showing us the opening. So between those two little dots is going to be the physical opening for the hand. I mean, my little girl's hand is minute in comparison to my big hand. But anyway, I started out small like that too once upon a time. So, right, we're going to unpin those little pocket bags now. And then we're going to reach for the skirt panels that you had pre-cut earlier. Okay. So I'm going to separate these now. So I've got two pocket bags here. So two little pocket bags. See, two pocket bags to use on the one side and two to use on the other side. So how are we all doing so far? Are we okay? How's the cutting going? Okay. I know it's going to take a little while for everyone to catch up. So I am going to get the fabric for the skirt ready next. Now, as I said, I'm keeping Lizzie's. Okay, great, Candace, you've cut. So if you just say cut on your comments, that would be great. Check that the pocket and opening is big enough for my phone. Oh, that's great, Wendy. Is it? Is it actually, is it the right size? Hi, Natalie. The panel. So what's the length of the panel? I have the hem drop, but I've missed the length. So, Chloe, you're going to need to measure from your waist to however long you want it to be, plus 5 centimeters when you're cutting. Okay, so make sure you add in those 5 centimeters, because then you have enough for hem turnings at the bottom, as well as your seam allowance at the top, because we're going to be superimposing our elastic over the top of the skirt when we attach it. So I hope that's helped. Hi, Nancy. Great, you're cut out too. Okay, super, Wendy. Great, that's good. I'm glad it's the right size. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is I'm going to bring over our skirt panels now, and we're going to start attaching our pockets next. Great stuff, Ronnie. Glad you cut them out. That wasn't too bad. So we're going to get our skirt panels now. So one little thing I'm going to mention, if you have a fabric that has a direction, okay, so in other words, if you've got birds and the birds' heads are at the top of the print and they're at the bottom, please make sure that when you are putting your pocket bags on, that they are in the same direction. Okay, so we don't want to put pocket bags on with the birds upside down or your print upside down. So I've gone for something easy. Oh, the width. Okay, sorry, Chloe. So I think you might mean the width, and if you wanted your skirt narrower, so I'll talk about that now actually. Okay, so as I was explaining in my little video, the fabric, this fabric is quite wide. It's 140 centimeters wide. Okay, so if I wanted to, this is going to be just the front section, for example. So this is going to get gathered up, bearing in mind my daughter's waist is like 60 centimeters. We're not going to talk too much about that measurement, but that is going to be quite a nice fullness at the waist, and then obviously we've got 140 centimeters on the hemline in terms of width. So if I double that, because this is the front panel, then the back panel will be just as wide. So effectively the hem is going to be 2 meters 80 wide. That's me using the full width of the fabric. If you don't want it as wide, or whatever the width is of your fabric, then put your selvage edges together, okay, and then measure an equal amount, and you'll just have to gauge how wide or how narrow you want your skirt to be. Just remember that the measurement needs to be double, so you need to have enough to cover your hips all the way around plus a bit of extra. So Okay, so you've got it. It doesn't have to be 280. You can be using the full width of your fabric. It's just that Lizzie is small. She's an 8-year-old, but she loves things super, super full. So if I was making the skirt for myself, I would also keep the full width of the fabric. But then I have some clients who have said to me that they'd actually prefer more of a pencil skirt shape with the elasticated waist. So in that situation, you would kind of look at what your hip measurement was, and it might be that you only need to use one length. Okay, so I hope that's making sense. But then you obviously would have to cut it in half because we need a front and a back panel so that we can actually do the pockets. So we need 2 seams. So hence 1 drop, 2 drops, and 4 pieces of pocket. Okay, so hi Michelle, 150. You are using the, it just depends on the age of the child. So 150 centimeters will give you 3 meters in terms of width at the bottom, which if she spins, it's just going to go, which will be really cool. And the viscose that you've bought is really soft, so it will gather up quite nicely into the waist. So I think it just depends on her age. I would say if she is younger than kind of 5-6 years old, then I would probably cut that down to maybe 1 meter. So I would just fold and take off 50 centimeters off the side, and then do the same on the other panel so that it's just 2 meters wide. I hope that helps, Michelle. Okay, so 9 years old, then I would say leave it. So do it the same as I'm doing for Elizabeth. So keep the full width if she likes to have very full skirts. Otherwise, just take a little bit off, as I say, off the side. So put your selvage edges together and then maybe cut 10 or 15 centimeters. So you're taking off only 30, but I don't think you really need to take it off. Okay. So I think that we are good to carry on. Okay, so I'm going to tilt the camera down again, and we're going to start to put on our pocket bags. Okay. One little thing I didn't mention is we need to make a mark. So on your pocket bag, where you've got this little dot at the bottom, so this one at the top is fine because that is the top of our pocket bag and the opening. And this little mark at the bottom over here, we need to make that mark on the wrong side of our pocket bags. Okay, so the easiest way to do this is to put your fabric right sides facing each other. Place your pocket bag on top again, and then put a pin through the hole like that. So the pin comes through on the other side. And we're going to put a little mark, so you could either put a pin or you can use a friction pen and put a little mark on the, there we go, just getting my pen. So I'm going to put a little mark where my pin has come out. Okay, and again, this is just to help you see where we're going to be stitching from and to. Okay. And then just do the same on the other side. So I'm going to demonstrate this one on the table. Okay, so right sides facing each other, like so. Place your pocket pattern piece on top, and then take your pin and push it through the hole like that. Okay, make a mark where the pin comes out on that side, fold back your seam allowance, and make another little mark over there. Okay, so again, this is a really good way of marking out the points of darts as well. So when you are sewing darts and things like that, if you missed our sew along, the last sew along we did, when we were doing the tailor's hams and sleeve rolls, you would mark your points in the same way. Okay, right, so pocket bags. I hope everyone is following, and we are now going to take, so I'm going to take the one panel, okay, and I'm going to open it up. I'm going to place it down onto the table, and I'm going to measure, so I'm going to take my tape measure and I'm going to measure from the seam, the top of the skirt down. I'm going to measure 5 centimeters, okay? So measure 5 centimeters. I'm going to pop a little pin in position like that. And I'm going to take one of my little pocket bags and I'm going to place it right side facing my side seam of my skirt, like that. Now, if you're an adult, okay, so this is child size, so the measurements will be shorter, so that her pocket is higher up. But if you're an adult, you're going to measure from your waist to where you comfortably feel you would want your pocket to be, okay? So remember, the opening is going to start at the top of the pocket bag and then finish a little bit lower down. And it's the same on the adult size. So you've got the opening starting at the top of your pocket bag, okay? So just measure. It could be that you wanted 10 centimeters down. It's a measurement that really is totally up to you, okay? So I'm going to measure 5 for Elizabeth, and I'm going to pin down to that little green dot, okay? So I've placed my marker on the 5, and I'm going to pin in and out, in and out. So I'm being very careful to make sure that my pins stay within my 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So we're going to come pin in and out, and there is my little green dot. So I'm just going to put this on the table so I can make sure I do it nice and properly. In and out. Okay, so I am just sewing to that green dot. So I'm sewing from the top down to the green dot. Not the top, sorry, 1.5 in from the top. So from here, 1.5 in. So we have a little overlap over there, okay? And really that's to allow us to have the seam allowance to stitch all the way around at the end. I completely unfolded pretty much. So that's the one pocket bag, and this is my first layer. So I'm going to do the same now on this side. So this is one width. So what we're going to be doing is putting a pocket bag on this side and a pocket bag on that side of the same panel, okay? Because we need a front, and then we're going to put the other ones on the back of the pocket bag, or the other pocket on the back of the skirt. So same thing on the other side, okay? So I'm now going to take the other pocket bag, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I measured 5 centimeters, but as I say, it could be that you're using a different measurement. Okay, so 5 centimeters down from the waist. I take my pocket bag and I place it right sides facing my selvage edge. So the right sides face each other. Now I'm doing this left-handed. So 1.5 centimeters down from the top of the pocket bag. So you can measure, if you want to be nice and accurate, and just give yourself that little dot marker at the top as well. So I'm right-handed, so this will be easier for me pinning this way. Okay. So Kay Mathewson's asking a question. If you wanted 10 centimeters down from the waist, and the adult size is at 10 centimeters from the physical edge of the fabric on the waist down, or do you need to add your seam allowance? Add 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, because that's what we've allowed for our overlap of the elastic at the end. So when we're putting our elastic on at the waist. So I guess if you want 10 from your waist down, you'll need to add your 1.5 seam allowance. Okay. I hope that's helped. Because your elastic is kind of going to be from your waist up a fraction. I mean, give or take, it's going to move around your body a little bit. Okay, super. So are we all ready to take this over to the sewing machine? I think what we'll do is we'll stitch this side on first, and then we will come back and duplicate to do the other side. Okay, so this is the front section we're working on. So we're now going to take it over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch. So if I show it to you this way, we're going to stitch basically from so not right at the top. We're going to sew from the first pin, which is 1.5 centimeters down. So we're going to start sewing here, and we're going to sew down to our last pin. Okay, you're going to stitch forwards and backwards all the way to that last pin, and forwards and backwards. So you're going to do a little back stitch. Okay, is both bits of the pocket that we are pinning to ace or to a single? No, so you're just pinning one pocket bag to one layer of the fabric, and it's got to go right side facing each other like that. Okay, and that's because we're going to stitch down, and the pocket bag will then pop out like that, and then we go all the way around. So I hope that makes sense, Jill. So one pocket bag to each side seam. Okay, but as I say, we'll do just the front for now. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So on your machine's needle plate, it will have a seam allowance guide, and you'll be looking for the marker that says 15. Okay, 15 or 5/8, which is 5/8 of an inch, which is the seam allowance that we are using, which is a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So you're going to take your pocket bag, as I said, yes, one piece of fabric. So Kay, you're just taking one piece of that pocket bag and attaching it on the side to the side seam, right side facing. So I've only got one piece on that side seam, and then if I bring my fabric to the other side, so this is just the one layer. Okay, here's my other pocket bag, and it's attached right side facing. Okay, so we're going to sew from the top down to the bottom pin, back stitching beginning and end. Now I'm using a cotton gauze, a double cotton gauze for my daughter's skirt. So I am using a Schmetz universal needle. Okay, Schmetz, it always goes back to front. Schmetz I find are superior machine needles. So I use an 80-12 on kind of mid-weight, so lightweight to mid-weight fabrics. If I'm using something that's very soft and delicate, then you probably use a 70-10 weight. So that's a needle weight. The needle gets basically thinner, the thinner your fabric. Other needles that we're going to be using this evening, and if you don't have them, it's not the end of the world, is a Microtex needle. So Microtex needles work very well for delicate fabrics or fabrics that have lurex threads in them. So I'm going to use my Microtex needle when I attach my elastic, because I'm putting on the gold and black elastic. So this has got lurex woven into the elastic. So that needle will work really well with that elastic. So we're going to start stitching our pocket bag on, as I say, 1.5 centimeters in, and on just a normal stitch length, so your normal 2.5 stitch length. Hold onto your threads as you begin to sew, and you're just going to stitch forwards and backwards all the way to that top pin, forwards and backwards again. So we'll just go forwards and backwards. How are we doing? Any other questions while we start to sew these pocket bags in? And once you get to the top, remember, as I said, 1.5 centimeters in from your pocket bag. So I'm not going all the way to the top, and then just do a little reverse, like so. just snip your threads off. And then we're going to repeat this process on the other side. And then we'll come back to pinning the pocket bags on again, so that we just recap that process. I don't like to, when I'm teaching my clients and teaching generally how to make things, I like to go over the technique we're doing a couple times, because sometimes it takes a little while for something. I know for myself, I kind of have to do things again and again for it to be reinforced. And by doing this, the hope is that you remember. So needle in, lift your presser foot, take that first pin out. I'm using my little Prim magnetic pin holder, which I absolutely love because they make picking up pins so easy. So we're going to stitch forwards and backwards. Again, we're starting 1.5 centimeters in from the edge of that pocket bag. Stitch all the way down the length of the pocket bag to that last little marker that we put in place. Okay. Try, I don't know how many of you are tempted often to sew over your needles, but I find that I try and recommend clients not to stitch over the needles, as in your pins, because you risk actually damaging your physical needle in the machine, and then obviously it can ricochet towards your eyes. So the projection is always at your face. So try not to sew over them if at all possible. Okay, so Leslie, you're saying your selvage edge is wide and a different color. Do I attach right at the edge of the selvage? So bring your pocket bag in a little bit more then. If your selvage edge has got like a printed, so if it's a printed fabric and you have the print doesn't go all the way to the selvage, then just bring your pocket bag in a little bit so that you're clearing the print, okay? And then what we'll do is just trim that excess off before we come to join the side seam. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a seam allowance that is parallel 1.5 from the edge. So what you might want to do before you actually put your pocket bag on is fold your fabric back together, put your selvage edges back together, okay, and then measure in however much it is that you need to get rid of so that your print is not affected. Okay, so if you need to measure in 2 centimeters, measure in 2 centimeters all the way down the length of your skirt and cut it off on both pieces. Then you can put your pocket bag on and you know you're going to sew a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So you should then have a perfect 1.5 seam allowance. It just means you're going to lose a tiny bit of your fabric. So I hope that helps. Yes, I'm going to show the pocket attached next, Donna. So just snipping off those threads. I'm going to move the machine out the way. I'm using my Bernina, which I love, but it's so heavy, so heavy. Okay, so that is the one side, that is the other side, and there you can see the pocket bags attached. So you see we've got this little bit here that hasn't been stitched yet. So if I put it back right side facing, and that's because we're going to close up our pocket bag later once we've done the other side. Okay, does that help, Donna? Okay, so I've got one pocket bag on this side, and moving along the width of my fabric, I've got my other pocket bag on that side, like so. Okay, again, it looks like a little ear popping out the side. Okay, so we're now going to do or put the second layer. So we're going to do the back layer next. So I'm going to just put this to one side for now, and I'm going to get the other side. Now remember what I said about if you have a fabric that has a directional print, so in other words you have an upside and an upside down, things could get upside down. Just take a little bit of time just to check. So if this had an upside down print on it, in other words, you know, I could flip it by accident, I would place it on the table like that, and I would check. So I'm going to take my other piece. So here's my 2 opening side seams. So I'm opening that up, and I would place them side by side like that and check that the print is actually correct. Okay, it also helps you to do this in advance, because when you are putting your pocket bag on, we're going to place the other one right sides facing, like so. Okay, so then you also don't put the pocket bag on this side, for example. So at least we know it's all going to be running in the same direction. So I'm going to measure 1.5 centimeters again. 1.5 for the top of my pocket bag, and that's obviously where I'm stopping stitching. Okay, and I'm going to just, while I'm here, put the measurement in for my other little pocket bag. 1.5 in, so that's in from the top. Okay, and I'm going to be stitching from there to there. So I'm going to measure again exactly what I've done on this side. So on my front panels, I'm going to measure on my back panels. So I'm going to measure down 5 centimeters again. Now it could be that you are doing, as I said, a different measurement like Kay is. So I'm going to place my pin in there, and then I can put the two together as well and just check, yep, I'm on course. They are going to match up perfectly. What you don't want to have happening is have this sort of situation where you have more fabric on one side, because when you come to put your pocket bags together, they're not going to align with each other. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're together at the top and that your pocket bags are aligning with each other at the side seam, like so. They are separate from each other though, so I'm going to get that one out the way for now, and I'm going to start to pin my pocket bag onto my back skirt panel on this side. Okay, so there's my last one. How are we doing with the pockets? I'm going to now move my fabric across to the other side, so to my other selvage edge. Okay, so here's my other side, and I'm going to take my last pocket bag, and I'm going to take the other panel of the skirt, and I'm going to bring it to this side again. And this is just so that you visually can see. We want to make sure that they are going to be running parallel with each other. Okay, so I'm going to measure down 5 centimeters again, place a pin, so that's the starting point for my pocket bag, and I'm going to pop in a couple pins down the length of my pocket, so I can check here. Yep, have a look, nice and straight there, and they marry up with each other here. So pin down the length of your pocket bag again and the side seam, and then we're going to go back and sew from this pin all the way to this pin. And remember, we are going to be back stitching at the beginning and the end. All right, how are we doing? Okay, great, Leslie, glad that I made that clear. Okay, fighting with the camera here. Okay, right, so we're just going to go back and stitch that seam together again on a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, press a foot down. We're going to stitch forwards and backwards all the way to the bottom of that last little pin. Pockets are tricky, so you know, I know that these are great little projects for beginners, but I always do like to challenge people, so you are getting a little bit of a challenge with the pockets. But let's be honest, who doesn't like a pocket? I love a pocket, and I know my daughter loves a pocket, so you know, it's a nice little thing to learn how to sew into the side seam, so in an inseam pocket. And this technique that you're learning tonight, you could put into pajama trousers if you wanted. So it's not just for the skirt. You'll have the pocket bag, so if you decided to make pajama trousers, for example, or loungewear, you could put them in your side seams and just follow the same kind of techniques and principles. That's correct, Monse, correct. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch the other pocket bag. So that one is stitched on now. Now our next step is going to be doing a little bit of pressing and then a little bit of overlocking. Okay, now your sewing machine will have an overlocking stitch on it, or you might have an overlocker at home. So I think what I'm going to do is show you what the overlocking stitch will look like on your machine. You don't have to overlock this section, but it will just help it not to fray out in the wash. So needle in, and we're going to just stitch forwards and backwards all the way to that top marker of 1.5 centimeters in reverse. Okay, right, how are we doing? Okay, so just snip off your threads nice and tidy. So I always like to trim my threads off very close to the garment, because then it means that I don't have any little tails popping out, and it just looks nice and neat. And having a good finish is really, I think, what sets handmade items apart. Okay. Right, just double check. Okay, so we are at a position where we have our skirt front and back. So we've got our side seam and we've got a little pocket bag. Okay, on this side. Okay, that's fine, don't worry Anna, no rushing. And that's our second pocket bag. Okay, so that's the one side, and then I've done the same on the other side. I've got some loose threads here, so I'm just going to snip those off nicely and make sure that everything is nice and neat. There we go. Now, anyone who knows me knows that when it comes to sewing, I love to press, okay? Pressing is really important. So I have a little, I guess, what do you call it? Oh, I can never think of the real word. PSP, pin, sew, press. What we pin, we sew, we then must press. And the whole objective of pressing is to make sure that if you have any tension in your stitches at all, that the heat from the iron and the steam from the iron lets that tension come out of the stitching, and it stretches and sets the stitches. Okay, to press, yes Natasha, to press. So I think what we're going to do next is we are going to press. I mean, I don't get to see if you don't press, but it's up to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to press this little seam open. Okay, so just from there to there, open. And then we're going to press the seam allowance. So if I look at this like this, we're going to press it open and then towards the pocket bag. All right, so we're going to press the seam allowance open first and then towards the pocket bag. And we're then going to get ready to start overlocking. Okay, so I'll take the camera off and show you on my machine what the overlocking stitch looks like on your sewing machine. You may need to refer to your manual on how to change the settings so that you pick up that overlocking stitch. Okay, so let's get our little ironing board out. Actually, I think I'm going to use my sleeve roll from last lesson and grab my iron. Okay, because it's a little thing I'm pressing, so I don't really need a big ironing board. So you see, these gadgets come in handy. So right, I'm going to just pop that on top of my sleeve roll and just press that seam. There we go. Allowance open, like so. So pressed nice and open. And now I'm going to press it towards the pocket bag. Okay. Press it nicely towards the pocket bag. So going to repeat that process on all 4 of the pocket bags. Okay, so we're going to press that open and then towards the pocket bag. So, and I'm going to do the same with my other panel. Okay, so press your seams open and then towards the seam allowances open and then towards the pocket bag. All right. Okay, and the nice thing with cotton, so if you've got a cotton and viscose fabric are both fabrics that are fairly natural in their composition. Viscose is actually made from wood pulp, or the easiest way to explain it is wood pulp. So viscose is wonderfully cool to wear. It's got a wonderful handle. So in other words, it drapes really well and it's quite heavy. So if you are wanting something, I mean, this top that I'm wearing is viscose. So it's a very soft and floaty fabric, very cool. It does tend to crease. But just as it creases, it drops out. So I must be honest, I love wearing viscose. I really love wearing viscose. Viscose, cotton, and the linen viscose mixes are very, very nice because the linen can sometimes be a bit stiff and hard and coarse. And with the viscose woven into that fabric, it just gives it a little bit of a softer texture. So it's more comfortable to wear. And it just feels nicer and it's a little bit easier to sew because it kind of moves around in your hands a little bit better. And I think nowadays we are seeing in terms of fabrics a lot more blended fabrics. So when I'm doing my buying for Watson's Fabrics, I always feel the fabric. When I was a teenager, I worked in a fabric shop in my little hometown back in South Africa, and I developed a real love for fabrics and textures, and I always love touching things and feeling things. But over the years, the experience that comes with touching and feeling fabrics, your mind tends to tell you whether something is of quality or not. And eventually you get so good at it that you can feel, you go, oh, that's got some viscose and that's got some cotton, and oh, there's a bit of wool in there, and you know, and you can feel the things that are polyester. And sometimes fabrics nowadays especially need a little bit of polyester because they help the garments to last longer. Yeah, so that's a little bit on fabric. Cotton as well is great. I know it is hard to feel fabrics at the moment, Wendy. I'm trying to take your mind away from where we are at the moment, but no, I appreciate what you're saying. You see, I was chatting so much I forgot to press my seam allowance towards my pocket bag. So how are we doing? How are we doing? I think that's all of my seams done. How are we doing, guys? As I say, it's up to you whether you want to press, but I'll show you the benefit of pressing. Look at how flat that seam is. Can you see how flat it is? It's opened up completely. So it is just flat and nice and seamless. Okay. Yeah, I can't wait for you to come as well. Okay, so are we ready to move on to our overlock stitch on the machine? Just a couple Y for yes or thumbs up would be good, just so that I know if I'm not going too fast or too slow. I must say I really miss having people face to face, so I feel like it's all very one-sided from my side, but it's lovely to see your interactions come up as we are sewing along together, so thank you. Right, how are we doing? Yes, all good. Okay. Okay, great, Sally. Right, Michelle, yours all good. Okay, I think we have enough high fives to get moving on. So, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to set our machines onto our overlock stitch. I am going to use my overlocker, but I'm going to show you the stitch that you need to be selecting on your machine, okay? So, I'm going to try and turn you around. There we go. Okay, so now at least you can see this in the right way as well. So my number 8, this stitch here, you can use that as an overlock stitch. Okay, so that's the symbol that you're looking for on your machine. Or if you don't have this kind of 2 rows of straight stitching with a zigzag in between, you can use your normal zigzag stitch. Okay. All right. So either a zigzag or an overlock. This is the overlock stitch. Now, when you are coming to do your overlock stitch, if you're using your machine, I'm just going to quickly try and show you how to set it up. So you're going to place your presser foot, okay, just so you can see there's my stitching line. So that's where I started sewing. You're going to place the presser foot, trying to do this one-handed is tricky. There we go. You're going to place it on line so that your needle is in line with that starting row of stitching. Press a foot on the edge and you're going to come all the way down and you're going to stop sewing at the bottom there. Okay, so you're going to stop overlocking here. Okay, and then we will trim away the excess. I'm going to be using, thanks Anna, I'm going to be using my overlocker itself. Okay, and I'm going to try and, there we go, trying to do this one-handed, so bear with me. So now, if you are using an actual overlocker, we don't want to start right on the edge, because if we start right on the edge, we're going to find it difficult to sew the top of our pocket bag. So I'm going to try and lift my presser foot. There we go. There we go. Lift my presser foot to get the fabric underneath, almost in line, so that my needles, sorry, I might be making you feel a bit sick. My needles are in line with that stitching line. And I'm going to just stitch and then come off so that there's no stitching from here to here for now. Okay. So I'm going to try. Yes, Kay, you're saying that you haven't changed your overlocking threads. Try and get this back in here. So if you haven't changed the overlocking threads, that's no problem. You can just use your zigzag stitch on your machine. That's absolutely fine. So don't worry, you don't have to use your overlocker. I'm just going to use it because I have set it up. And to be fair, if I do think I didn't really tell you to set up your overlocker. So we're going to just zigzag stitch between those 2 lots of stitching. And just cut off. Okay, so I'll show you kind of where, okay, so I've come in and then off, so I can still get access to my pocket bag at the bottom. Okay, so stitched from there to there, and you're going to do that on all of the sections that you've sewn on your pocket bag. Yes, that's right, Donalyn. So you're going to overlock the sections that you've just sewn, so between those 2 rows of stitching. Okay, so we're not going to sew right from the edge. You're going to overlock from here to here and come off. Okay, so going to do all of those. With the benefit with when you're using your zigzag or your overlock stitch on your sewing machine is that you can be a lot more accurate. It's exactly where you're starting and stopping. With the overlocker, you've kind of got to drive into it and out of it. No, so you'll just start and stop. Emily, you will start and stop sewing with your zigzag or overlock stitch. Yes, that's fine. Sally, you can let your overlocker trim off a little bit of the seam allowance. I'm letting mine do the same thing as well. Okay, so you see there's my second one. So you see I've just come in a little bit, and that's just so that I can get rid of the fluffy edges of my selvages, because I used the full width of my fabric. Okay, so that's the one skirt panel, and now moving on to the next. What stitch length and width do you recommend? So Claire, I think stitch width probably 4, and stitch length I would say, well, I don't know what model sewing machine you have. I can't recall. But if you have if your machine has, I'm going to grab this one so I can just demonstrate. If your sewing machine, so this Janome, this is a bit bad, it's going to be back to front. But on my pattern selector, I would select the number for my overlock stitch. I would select pattern H, okay, but H is in orange, so I would change my stitch length to SS, which is the secondary stitch selector. So all of these are your primary, the blue ones, then these ones are the secondary stitch selector, and you don't really have to worry about changing your stitch length. So do you have this a machine similar to this? Do you have the second stitch option? Because it may be that you need to just put your stitch length to SS. Because this is a Janome, a J318. So we'll carry on doing those little overlocking stitches to finish off the pocket bag. Oh, it's digital. Okay, so yeah, so then you would select the number. So yes, I think then in that case, 4 on your stitch length, 4 on your stitch width, Claire, and probably 3.5 on the length of your stitch. So 4 on your width and 3.5 on the length. Try that and see what it looks like. So just gonna overlock these little edges off. Okay. And I think I've got one more to do. How are we doing, girls? I hope that was helpful, Claire. Do we have any gentlemen joining us this evening? I meant to ask, actually. I know we had a few last week. Great, Claire. I'm glad that was helpful. Or not last week, our last class. Last sew along. Okay, so I'm going to move my overlocker out the way now. For now, don't worry. We'll be back. And I'm going to pull my machine forward because the next thing we're going to do is called understitching. Okay, now understitching is when you stitch your seam allowance to either a pocket bag or a facing around a neckline, and basically what it does is it actually pulls the pocket to the inside. Okay, it does mean that we then have a row of stitching running inside the pocket edge like that, but it stops your pocket. So if you think about your side seam being like that, it stops your pocket from rolling out of the actual seam. So if you were making something and using a pocket that was in a contrasting color, I know Donalyn, you're doing purple pockets, I think, on your skirt. You would definitely want to understitch your pocket bag because it will keep your pocket bag inside, and then at least when you put your hand in, you just get this little glimpse of color. Okay, so we're going to understitch. Now, understitching we can do from the right side, so normally you will stitch with this side facing you. I think because I want you to follow your stitch where you'd actually sewn, I am going to ask you to actually do it with the wrong side facing so that you can see exactly where it is that you need to be stitching. Okay, so we're going to take our pocket bag. If my hand is the base of the machine, I'm going to place it. If I do that, hopefully you can see. So I'm going to place my pocket bag onto the bed of the machine, onto the table part. And I'm looking for where I started sewing. I'm going to try and turn around and show you this way. Okay, so there was my original row of stitching. Okay, and I'm going to place my presser foot on this row of stitching, and I'm going to stitch from here all the way to here. Okay, and I'm going to back stitch, but the presser foot on the edge, you'll see there's going to be about a 3mm gap. I don't want this to, okay, pop the needle in. So it's going to be about a 4mm gap from the first row of stitching to where my needle is. So my needle is in my middle position. If you wanted to, you could move your needle over to the left. I'm going to leave it in the middle just for ease of demonstration. So we're going to literally stitch forwards and backwards. I need to use the right pedal to start, don't I? So forwards and backwards. There we go. And then all the way down. Now, as I'm sewing, I want to make sure that I open that seam up like that, because I don't want to have a bubble. So make sure that this seam is opened to its maximum. Okay, it's much easier if you have two hands, because you want this seam to be bound onto the pocket. Okay, so keep stitching all the way to the bottom of the pocket bag and then reverse like so. So I'm going to pull this out, and then you'll be able to see hopefully from the right side. Okay, oh dear, got a little, don't know what I've done there, I'll have to, okay. Right, here we go. So there we go. You can see there is my understitching, okay, to there. So I'm going to now snip that off. But you can see now that this pocket seam allowance, the pocket bag seam allowance, doesn't flap about. It's now permanently held down to the pocket bag itself. Okay. Donalyn, you're saying you've overlocked your seam together. Do you need to redo this? Which seam have you're overlocking the pocket bag to the seam, the side seam of the skirt. You are overlocking them together. Exactly where you've sewn is where you're overlocking. Okay. Right, I think I've done something. I think I might have to, there we go, okay. Just a little bit too much thread. So do the understitching on all of your pockets, okay, so on all the pocket bags. Again, the key really is you don't want to supersede, so you don't want to stitch beyond your first row of stitching, okay, because then it's going to make it very difficult to join your pocket bags to join it together. Okay. If you stop a little bit ahead of, that will be fine, okay. So just try and get it as in line as possible. So I'm going to do my second one. So again, I'm going to line it up and I'm going to stitch forwards and backwards. And I'm opening up my seam. So hopefully that you can see that. And on this time, because my pocket bag is to my left, I am using the right hand side of my presser foot against my stitching line. So all the way down to almost, and then another little reverse. Okay, super. Snip off all your little threads. How are we doing? Are we enjoying pockets so far? Right, that's my one side with my pocket bag understitched on my front, so we'll call that my front. I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm now going to do the back pocket understitching. Emily, when you're understitching, you are understitching literally just from where you had started to stitch your pocket bag, okay? So you're understitching from here down. So in other words, I'm taking my pocket bag like so. I'm pushing my seam allowance towards my pocket bag, okay? You want to make sure that you're stitching your seam allowance down to your pocket bag. And I'm going to start sewing here, and I'm going to sew down to just in line with where I stopped sewing, or just a little bit above, and then back stitch again. Does that help? A thumbs up or a Y for yes if it does. Hopefully that's helped. So press a foot down parallel to that stitching line, and forwards and backwards with a little back stitch all the way to almost the top, and another back stitch. So really, as I say, the understitching is to keep your pocket bag inside the skirt so it doesn't pop out your side seam. Okay. And if we were understitching a garment in terms of like a facing or something like that, that's great, Emily, I'm glad. You would be understitching from the right side. And the objective of understitching is always just to pull the seam allowance inside, giving you a nice, clean, neat finish. So for us, it is giving us a nice, clean edge to our pocket bags. Okay, so one more for me to do. How are we doing, everybody? Just another little bit. I keep pushing the wrong pedal under the table. That's the crux of having two machines set up at one time. Okay, right. So I think what we will do next is we will start to prepare our gathers. Okay, we could do it one of two ways. We could either join the skirt together first, but I think if we do our gathers first, then we can gather up, because if you've got a lot of fabric, that's good, Candace, sorry. If you have a lot of fabric, so like a lot of us are using the full width of the fabric, effectively you have 1 meter 40 distance to cover in a row of stitching. Now with the gathering, it's about increasing your stitch length so that the bobbin threads become looser, so you can draw them up, and by drawing them up they gather the fabric up nice and tightly. So the key when it comes to gathering is to make sure that you start with a decent length of thread, that you increase your stitch length to as long as your machine will be able to do. I sometimes change my bobbin, so if I've got remnants of bobbin threads left over, I will use those for gathering. And I think I'm probably looking at my thread match. I might well change over to cream now. Otherwise I'm going to run out of thread that matches my skirt. So I'm going to change over in the meantime. But the key with the gathering is doing 3 parallel rows of stitches. Okay, so not only are you learning about pockets tonight, we're also covering gathering. You're going to learn a little bit of how to adjust your machine. You want to make sure that you have got a fairly full spool in your bobbin, okay? Because it's really the bobbin threads that we use to draw up when we're doing the gathering. And what you don't want to do is be stitching out of your 1 meter 40. You don't want to be stitching to 1 meter 20 and then you run out of bobbin, because you then have to re-sew that whole line of stitching. With gathering, you need to have 3 rows of stitches that are one continuous, so each row, should I say, is a single row of thread. So you can't like do a back stitch and join. It has to be one long line of stitching. Okay, if you stop and start, the gathering's not really going to work very well. So I'm just going to change over my bobbin thread and the top thread on my machine. If you have a full spool, you might not wish to do this, but you could if you wanted. And as I said before, increase your stitch length on your machine. So I'm going to pump mine up to 5. So a lot of machines will be either 4 or 5 on the stitch length. What do you think, Anna? Do we need to press the understitching? Yes, we will. We can press that either now before you do your gathering. It's probably a good idea to do before we do the gathering. So good question. Good question. So I'm just quickly changing over my thread for the gathering, and I've increased my stitch length to number 5. And I'm also going to change the position of my needle on the machine. Okay, so the stitch length, okay, so Candice, the stitch length, it depends on your machine. I don't know what type of machine you've got. I will try my best, Angela. I don't know what type of machine you have, but when you are looking at your stitch length, it's basically if you are if you've got a machine with a dial, you've got a brother. Is it a programmable one, or is it one that just has a one dial selector with lots of different stitches? I don't know which model you have. So you might have a pattern selector that does you like a straight stitch, but it's all close together, and then you switch it and it goes to slightly bigger, and you switch it again and bigger. I don't know. If you have got one of those, then you will need to look for the pattern selector that has the longest straight, just the dial. Okay, so yes, I think I know the machine you have. So you will be selecting the straight stitch that has the longest gaps in it. Okay, super. Right, so I have changed my stitch length to 5. Are we all good to, I think we'll do a little pressing, as Anna so lovingly reminded me. I love it. Oh, okay, so, and I'm going to start. So as I said, I want a nice long thread to get started with for my gathering. Okay, and I'm just going to get my iron and just quickly press those, the understitching. I'm pressing on the wrong side. If you are working with a fabric, do I change the stitch length above the bobbin too? No, it should just be your machine's stitch length that you're changing, Tammy Dexter. You don't need to worry about changing your bobbin tension at all. Okay, so if you can't move your needle left or right, so if your needle is only in one position, then I will explain how we're going to start the gathering process, okay? And then I will, on my second explanation, I will talk about moving the needle. So for everyone who can't move their needle, so in other words, your needle can only stay in the middle position, then listen up to the first explanation. Right, so last little pocket bag. Thank you, Anna. Right, great stuff. Okay. Okay, so if you cannot, you don't know, Chris, you don't need to change the tension dial at all. The only thing that you are changing is your stitch length. You don't need to change your tension, okay? So what we are going to do is if you have only got on your machine the option of keeping your needle in its middle position, okay, you're going to start by placing your presser foot on the very edge of the fabric. Okay, so your first row, so you want to give yourself a 1.5 centimeter clearance, okay, because we've got a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So you're going to pop a pin in there just to, sorry, I'm trying to do this with one hand again. So pop a pin in 1.5, and you're basically going to start sewing from here. So if you cannot move your needle position, you're going to place your presser foot on the edge of the fabric like so. And you're going to sew There we go. So fabric on the edge, okay? And you're going to sew all the way along the length of your fabric until you get to the other side, okay? So you'll keep sewing, sewing, sewing until you get to here. And again, give yourself a reminder that you are going to stop sewing 1.5 centimeters from the edge, okay? So you're going to place a pin over here. Just pop that pin in there. So effectively, we're going to start sewing one row all the way to here. Then pull a length of thread and cut it off. Come back to the starting point, and you will place the right hand side of your presser foot on that row of stitching. So imagine you have a row of stitching running here. You're going to lift. So I'm going to just place a pin for demonstration purposes, okay? So that's my row of stitching. You can see it's in line with the presser foot. I'm going to lift, and I'm going to place my presser foot on the edge of that line, like so. And I'm going to sew again, keeping the right hand side of my presser foot on that row all the way again to the end. Pull off a length of thread about 15 centimeters and then cut it off. Come back for your third row. Okay, so if my third row, I've got a row of stitching over there, I'm going to lift my lift my presser foot, and I'm going to place the presser foot down again on the edge of the fabric, that previous row of stitching. Sorry guys, I'm trying my best, but it's really difficult with one hand. And I will sew my third row from there all the way to the end, and again leave a long length of thread, and at that stage I will then tell you what to do next. Okay, so we're going to do 3 parallel rows of stitching on both layers, so your front and your back. Okay, remember 1.5 centimeters in from the edge on both side seams. Now, if you have a machine where your needle position can move, then you're going to do that. So if I look at my sewing machine, this is my needle position here. So you can see my stitch length is at 5. I'm going to move for my first row of stitching. I'm going to move my needle all the way to the left. So you can see this little flashing thingy here, and you can see my needle at the bottom. If I move it like this, sorry, that's my length. This is my width here. So it was at 3, which is the needle in the middle. I'm moving it now over to the right, the far right. And my starting point is going to be the same. And I'm going to start on the edge of the fabric in line with that 1.5 centimeter seam allowance guide, like so. Okay, and I'm going to sew all the way, keeping my presser foot on the edge of that fabric. Okay, right on the edge, all the way. So it's really important that you keep your row nice and straight. So you can see this is already starting to gather up a little bit. What we are going to be doing is trying to ease it out. So that's why I said you need to have a decent length of thread, because it's going to want to rouge up a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit of tension between my fingers just to help it not rouge up too much, because I am going to have to sew 3 rows of stitches together, next to each other, should I say. So just keep going with this. I don't know how many of you are on your gathering yet. Now, a lot of the summer styles, both last season and looking like it will be this season too, are these tiered dresses and blouses with little tiered frills. How you get that effect is by doing this gathering. Okay, so all the way. Okay, nearly at the end. Okay, and I'm going to stop. So you can see I'm stopping pretty close, and I'm going to pull a really nice long thread because I need to pull out some of this tension that's that's come up. So I'm going to need two hands. I'm going to need to put the camera back. So I'm just going to ease this out, but I'm just going to show you firstly where you're going to need to start your second row. This is obviously if you've got able to move your needle position over. So my second row, again, the right hand side of my presser foot on that row of stitching, presser foot down, and off you go again. So you can see, I'll do a little bit of stitching just so you can see. Okay, so if I lift that up, there we go. You can see you've got two parallel rows already, okay? So all the way to the end, and then come back and do exactly the same thing and put the presser foot on the edge there, and you're going to do your third row. So that's how you get your 3 parallel rows of stitching in place for your gathering. So just keep going and doing the gathering on both of your layers. Okay, so I'm just easing out the excess, and then we're going to continue to stitch those rows of gathering. So I've still got a little bit, that's great. Okay, so I've taken all the tension out of that seam, so now I can continue. Really important to keep the right hand side of your presser foot on that first row of stitching. Okay. Okay, so if you can only move your needle from the left or the middle, then Donalyn, keep it in the middle and do as I described for the first option. Needle in the middle, put your presser foot on the edge, so your first row, then put the right hand side of your presser foot, as I've done here, on that row of stitching, and just keep going. So the fundamental difference is that by being able to move your needle to the right, you're just getting all of your stitching inside your seam allowance, okay? All your gathering inside of your seam allowance. And it's only a few millimeters, so it's not a big deal. So we just keep on going and sewing. So as I said, you may want to use up your old thread, or thread that you're using up your bobbins. So it just depends, but just try and keep those rows nice and straight. Now it's much easier, so I'm doing it this way around because it's a lot easier to actually do all this prep work while you're working with a flat piece. Once we start to put those pockets, once we join the pockets and the side seams together, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to manipulate all of this. So as I said as well, by getting your gathering done now, it makes your side seams easier to join and easier to gather up the gathering all together. Yes, is there a quick, so Natalie is asking, Michelle is asking, is there a quick way to pull out the thread? If you grab onto the bobbin thread, okay, so if your needle has snapped or the thread has come out halfway through or you've run out of your bobbin, then pull on the bobbin thread, just pull it and you'll see it just all comes undone. Okay, and that is obviously on the proviso that your stitch length is on a number 5, so it's on the biggest stitch length that you can have. So I'm on the 3rd row of my front layer of the skirt. So just keep doing those seams. It's a good way also of getting your eye kind of trained in at staying straight and following a straight line. How are we doing, guys? Keep going. So this Benin is a little bit more quiet than my Janome. My Janome is very noisy. but I thought that this would be a better machine to use tonight because of the noise and trying to talk over the sewing machine. So hopefully you can all hear me when I'm talking above the machine. Okay. So once you've done your 3 rows, so you'll see there I've got my 3 rows, they're all nice and parallel with each other. At the back, okay, we are going to fish out these 3 bobbin threads. Okay, I hope you can see that okay. Yes, Sarah Jane, you are going to need to do that. So you will need to do your side seams first because you're lining it. Totally forgot about that, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry about that. Okay, so I've picked up the 3 bobbin threads. Okay, it's really important at this stage that once you've done those 3 rows of stitching that you only pick up the bobbin threads. You don't want to pick up one of these top ones. It's only the bobbin. And I'm just going to show you a little bit as to what happens. So we're going to tie a knot into the end of these threads. So you'll see you want to make sure that they are nice and straight, okay? But look at what happens if I just pull along. See how that gathers up? So it's very clever. This is a very clever technique. Jill, ideally we want the 3 to be in the seam allowance. If your last row is sitting on your stitching line or just below, that's okay, because we're going to be putting our elastic over on top and then zigzagging. So it should be okay. Hopefully it's not too far down. So I'm tied off, as I said, just the bobbin threads, okay? So you just want to get those bobbin threads together and tie them off. And I'm going to go all the way to the other side. So I'm feeding back any extra rouging that I have here. I'm making it nice and straight again and sending it. Oh, I thought it nearly snapped, but it didn't. So that's a good thing. And we're sending it all the way back to the other side. Okay, and I'm again wanting to pick up just the bobbin thread. So I'm using my pin just to gently tease those out. Okay, so I know I've got only my bobbins there. So I'm going to tie again a knot in those as well. And that's just to stop them from unraveling. And we're going to do the same on the other piece now. So I want you to do your other 3 rows on your other piece, doing exactly the same thing. And again, just make sure that you are starting with the pocket side, okay? So if we recap, you're placing a pin in, and so there's my pocket bag, okay? I'm preparing the other side now. So there's my pocket bag, and I am sewing, I'm putting in a pin within the first 1.5 centimeters. So I'm not going to gather this edge. I'm gathering from the pin all the way down the length or width of my skirt to another pin that I'm going to put in 1.5 centimeters on this side. Okay, so I'm going to do my 3 rows from pin to pin on a stitch length of 5. Press a foot on the edge. Have I got? Yes, I've got a decent length of thread. So again, make sure you start off with a decent length of thread. Okay. And just now you can imagine, obviously, if we had joined our side seams together and then we're trying to do this long, big row of stitching, effectively almost 3 meters in length, it's going to be very difficult to draw up evenly. Okay, so that's another reason why I'm asking you to do it in this method. It's to help us have less to gather up and also to be able to get it across an even area. So we're going to basically be giving ourselves a midpoint and then we're going to be gathering that up in 2 sections, so a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, giving us our whole. But we'll do that a little bit later. Okay, so Angela is saying, when I was learning to sew, I was taught to sew 2 lines of gathering stitches and then sew down the middle of the gathering stitches. You can do that too, but it's all about the placement. Can you place the difference in the 2 or 3 rows? Okay, so if a pattern asks you to ease, okay, so to do easing. Easing is effectively the same as what we're doing with the gathering in terms of the stitch length, okay, so it's still a long stitch. The difference is that you will only do 2 rows. Now, 2 rows on easing you would do on a sleeve head potentially, so if it's fitting into a really nice armhole, and it's a nice neat, so you don't have gathers or anything like that on the sleeve. If it's meeting into your armhole, for example, or a curve over a bust seam, then you would need to ease that seam into the other seam. So it's where 2 meet together and one is slightly bigger than the other. Easing helps you to draw up the piece that's slightly bigger. Whereas with gathering, it's 3 rows, and that's because it just helps you to get a really nice tight effect. When it comes to any time, I mean, to be honest with myself, when I'm putting sleeves in, I still do 3 rows, whether it is a smooth sleeve head or a gathered one. I like to use 3 parallel rows because I find it just gives me a much better finish. And it helps me to ease it in better. But traditionally, 2 parallel rows of sewing is for easing, so slightly different. I hope that's answered your question, Angela. How are we doing on our gathering? Okay. So again, mine, because it's on a 5, it is rouging up quite a bit. So I am just teasing out the excess. I don't want it to snap. So I am just gently easing back the little bit that has naturally gathered up. Okay, and I'm going to come back and do my 2nd row. How are we doing, Sarah Jane? I know you're going to do your side seams first. Sorry about that, darling. Okay, so I'm on my 2nd row on my last layer. So 1 more row to go. Just keep checking I still have bobbin thread. Okay. Nearly at the end. And I've just got 1 more row to do. How are we doing with the gathering, ladies? And are there any gents? I don't know. If you are all kind of nearly there, just high 5 or thumbs up or a Y for yes. Would be good. Okay, 1 more row for me. That's fine. Great stuff, Sarah Jane. I'm glad to see that. Okay. Okay, that's okay, Candace. No rush. It's okay. I must say, doing these little sew-alongs is making myself, I don't know about you girls, I presume so, but one of the reasons that I think my classes, when we were allowed face-to-face, were so popular is because it's hard to make time for yourself. And when you commit to something and you commit to time, it makes you honor it. So I think it's really nice that you're taking time out this evening to just have a little bit of time for yourself. So, am I still frozen, Donnellan? I hope not. I'm sorry. I can only blame EE, my internet provider, phone provider. Okay. Right. So last row. And then again, I'm just going to ease it back to get rid of the excess. Okay. Because I want to start off my gathering making sure that there's nothing is, like you can see over here, it's all kind of started to rouge up a little bit. So you want to make sure that it is nice and straight, okay, because we don't want it to be pulling up at different rates. So that's really the key, is you want your 3 parallel rows of stitching all on the same stitch length. And you want to make sure there's no uneven gathering up before we start to rouge it up. So just pulling that down. Just gently get that excess, ease it back out again. Okay, right. So I'm at the end. So I'm now going to pick up those bobbin threads. It looks like I might have a little knot. I hope not. So I'm going to try and pick up just the bobbin threads. I just snip that. Hopefully that will help. Okay, so just the bobbin threads is what you're wanting to pick up. If you pick up one of the top threads, then it's going to lock the stitches, so it'll stop you being able to gather it up. Oh my goodness, that is really lucky, Michelle. Your thread came out just at the right point. Okay. So you'll need to just put a little bit more on your bobbin to get ready to, because our next step is going to be to join our side seams together. So I'm going to come along to this side, and I'm going to tie up my bobbin threads on this side. Okay, I hope that you're able to see what I'm doing. Okay, so just pulling those 3 bobbin threads through. Okay, and just tying a knot. And that's just so that I can help keep the 3 rows together, so they're going to pull up nice and evenly. Okay, so once you've done that, we're going to find the middle of each of our layers, okay? And we're going to put a little pin. I'm going to change over the thread onto my normal thread, because I'd switched over the colors onto a cream. So I'm going to put back, rethread my machine with the matching thread. And then we're going to find the middle of the skirt panel, both for the front and the back. Okay, and we're going to place a pin in the middle, and that's just to give us a central front, so a center front and a center back, before we start to rouge up and draw up the gathering stitches. Okay, so we will do that in a minute. Just get the machine threaded. And you're going to want to put your needle back into the middle position now. So again, just get your needle back in the middle position if you had been able to move it. Okay, and change over my bobbin to get that. Okay, right. Okay, so far we've done our pocket prep and we've done our gathering prep. So now we're going to start to put the skirt together. Okay, so let me just get my machine all sorted and set up. Okay. Okay, right. There we go. So I'm going to put my stitch length back on normal. So my stitch length I'm going to move down to 2.5, okay? And because I'd increased it to 5, didn't I, to do the gathering. So all the way down to 2.5 for my stitch length, and make sure my needle is in the middle position and I'm on a straight stitch. Okay, so I'm now set up and ready to be able to start sewing. So what we're going to do is get that midpoint, okay? So we're going to take the two selvage edges where I've got my two little pocket bags, put them together and find the middle, okay? Place a pin in the middle, okay, like that, of your fold. I'm also going to mark it with a friction pen, just so that I've got a really good guide in case the pin falls out. So I've got at least a marker to help me know that that's my center front or my center back. I'm going to take the other skirt panel and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, placing the selvage edges together like so, and finger in the fold to find the middle, okay? So this becomes my center back. Put a line on there and I'm going to pop a pin in as well. Okay. Right. So that's my two centers together. So what we're now going to do is actually put the two side seams together, and we're going to sew down the pocket edge, around the pocket bag, and then down the rest of the side seam. And a little bit more pressing will be coming your way. So keep your bobbin threads out of the way, okay? So put them out of the way of the side seam. We don't want those to get stitched in. So you can see that's why I've got a decent gap, all right? And I'm going to place it so that my fabric, I'm going to now tilt the camera so you can see. There we go. So I have the right side of my fabric facing me, okay? And I'm going to make sure, I think those are just scrap threads, okay, that I now bring my second skirt panel, and I want to get my stitches, those gathering stitches, out of the way, and I'm going to place it right side facing each other. Okay, so if I put this in here, maybe you can see a bit better. So I'm going to pin my side seams together, okay, and I'm going to pin in that seam allowance again, okay, like so. Now remember I was talking to you about your notches earlier on. So the pocket bag, we put these little snips in. So I want you to match up those notches together. See, there's a little cut. So match your notches first, like so. Have a look for the other notches. Match those notches together first. This is such a little pocket bag. It's so cute. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to fill in between. Okay, so you can see I'm putting all of my pins also at a 90-degree angle to the edge of the pocket bag itself. Okay, right, there we go. So we're going to stitch down and around the pocket bag and into the 1.5 over here, and then down the length of our side seam, okay? So I want you to pin your side seam together all the way down, okay? So pin in and out, pin in and out. So what we're going to do is join our side seams together. So we're going to pin this side and then we're going to pin the other side. Okay. Then we're going to press it and overlock it. Okay. So I'm going to just bring this back up again. So we've now pinned the one side seam like so. Okay. So we're going to stitch down to our stitching line over there, and then we're going to turn and come all the way around down to the bottom here, and then turn and come all the way down. Okay, so we're going to do this on a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to position this on my 1.5, and I will try and demonstrate as I sew the seam. Okay, right, so hold on to the threads as we start, and reverse. So you'll see I'm being very careful not to catch my gathering stitches. Okay. Okay, so we're going to stitch down. So I'm stitching down to this little point over here. Ow, ow, ow. Okay, trying to do this one-handed is a little bit difficult. Okay, so I'm stitching all the way to there. I put my needle in, I lift my presser foot, and I pivot my fabric so that I am on 1.5 on the presser foot. So now I'm going to sew around the edge of my pocket bag. Now, on a curved seam, if you missed our last sew along, you'll pick up this little tip. So you leave your needle in and you lift and you gently pivot your fabric as you stitch around a curve, okay? You can also decrease your stitch length. This is a pocket bag, so I'm not going to do that. But as you sew around, you'll notice a little gap will form here between my 1.5 and the edge of my fabric. So I leave my needle in, and I lift my presser foot, and I pivot my fabric. Okay, so the key really is to keep the seam allowance accurate from here to the edge of the fabric on that 1.5 centimeter seam allowance guide. Needle in, lift, and pivot. So you're going to keep going all the way around your pocket bag. I was just checking my stitches there. Sometimes the machine makes a funny noise, and it's because I'm trying to do this one-handed. So I hope this is helping you be able to see. We're getting to the pocket bottom now. Needle in, take my pin out, needle in, okay, so continue. So there's lots and lots of lifting and pivoting as we're coming round the edge of the seam, okay, and again, as I said, that helps you to get a really nice curved seam because you're following the shape of the pattern and you're not trying to stretch it and force it around the curve. You're letting the machine do the work. But it does mean that you do have to keep stopping and starting, stopping and starting. So it's a little bit more lengthy, but definitely worth it. Okay, so now as we're approaching the bottom of the pocket, okay, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We're going to stitch to here and then come up a little bit. Okay, so continue along, following your seam allowance guide. See, there's my press line. See, I've got a little press line. Okay, needle in. Wait for the camera to just adjust. I hope, Wendy, this is okay. So we're going to lift and pivot, and you want to push that seam allowance underneath. And I want to make sure on this side. So underneath, I just want to make sure that my seam allowance goes underneath. Okay. And I'm stitching across, needle in. So we can see there is the end of my stitching. So I'm going to meet that row of stitching. There we go, needle in. And I'm going to lift and turn it all the way around to start sewing down the length of the seam. So I want to move that seam allowance nicely out the way. See, my seam allowance is out the way. There we go. And I'm going to just start sewing down. And I'm back on my 1.5. So all the way down to the bottom of the skirt. Now, I know that looks like 2, but the actual edge of the fabric is on my 1.5. It's just the little fluffy bits that are popping out. So I am sticking to my 15 millimeter seam allowance down the length of the skirt. So you're going to repeat this on the other side as well. And when you get near the bottom, so I've got about 1 inch and I can see one layer stretched out a little bit more than the other. So I'm going to start to do a little back stitch over here and then all the way to the end and reverse like so. Okay. So we are going to do the same on the other side of the pocket bag. Okay, let's just get that out of the machine. And now I can check the other side. Okay, so we're then going to overlock stitch down and around the edge of the pocket bag, around at the bottom and down the length of the seam. We are going to press, remember I said press, pinso press. So we are going to press the seam allowance open. Okay, so we won't be able to open up our pocket bag, but we will definitely be able to open up our side seam along the length of the side like that. Okay, so do the same on the other side, and then we're going to, as I said, overlock. So I've joined one panel together, so you'll see now if I open that up, oh, we have a little pocket, a really little pocket. But we have a pocket. So that's the one side. I'm going to continue to make sure that I'm putting my right sides together. This is going to be very full. And I'm going to now do exactly the same that I've just done, and I'm going to join up the side seams of the other side. And then we'll do some pressing. Okay, so again, first thing we want to do is make sure that we keep our gathering threads out of the way so that they don't get tangled up. Is everyone following on okay? Is this all right? Not going too fast? Okay. And again, I'll just go through this again. So just pin your side seams together. Okay, Michelle is asking, so we're just going to pin all the way around. Remember, as I said, match up those little notches. Michelle, I'll come to your question in a minute. Michelle's asking if her thread keeps snapping in almost the same place. It could be, I don't know, have you put in a new needle? It might be that your needle needs replacing on your sewing machine. Have you replaced your needle recently? Sometimes a blunt needle will keep snapping the thread. It could be that your tension is a little bit tight as well. So just keep pinning, keep those together. I'm going to place a little pin in there. Put a pin in here. That's my little turning point, and then I go up, and then I come back down. Okay. Let me just quickly check there's a few messages. So yes, Michelle, I hope that helped. Okay. Okay, so it looks like there's a little, so when it comes to the bottom of the pocket bag, so I'm going to go over that little bit. I'm going to flip the camera around here and try and do it this way. Okay, so there's my pocket bag. I'm just quickly matching up my notches. Okay, so at the bottom of your pocket bag, you're going to move that seam allowance out of the way, okay? And we are stitching okay. So you're stitching 1.5 along here to here, okay? And then we push our seam allowance back. We lift the presser foot, let the seam allowance go back, and then stitch forward a little bit. Go up a little bit, and then we continue down. Okay, does that help? So you stitch into the point, you back stitch a little bit, bring your seam allowances forward, and then continue to the end here, and then we turn and come down. Does that help? So Michelle, have you got a relatively new needle in your machine? Okay, did that help with the pocket bag? Okay, great. Okay, Donna. So we're going to continue now to stitch our 1.5 seam allowance as we go around that pocket bag again. So we're starting at the top, forwards and backwards. Okay. So stitch all the way. I'll bring my camera back and try and make it easier for you to see. I'll try again. So if you've never changed your needle, Michelle, that might well be the issue. And on the viscose fabric, so I was talking about viscose fabrics earlier. You want to make sure that you're using a needle that is an 80/12 or a 70/10 on the weight of the needle. So you can use the Microtex needles or the universal needles, but a 70/10 or an 80/12 would be a good weight to use on viscose. Or these lightweight cottons. The heavier the fabric, the higher the number needs to be on your needle. So for example, if you were working with denim, you would need to have a 90/12 or a 100/16. If you were working with chiffon, it would be a 60/8 or a 70/10, for example. Okay, so right, we are just doing, okay, so I'm coming to the top of my pocket bag, and I'm going to, there we go, needle in, lift, and I'm going to pivot round. Just bear with me, being single-handed on this. And here we go. So around the curve, needle in, and I'm lifting and I'm pivoting to make sure that my fabric here remains on my 1.5 stitching line on my seam allowance guide on the machine. Needle in, lift and pivot. So if you missed the beginning bit about when I was talking about finding your center, okay, you want to put your selvage edges together. So effectively your two side seams, and you want to fold it to the center, and that you will mark as your center. Okay, needle in, lift and pivot. Needle in, lift and pivot. So if you are not doing the pockets, find your centers and then pin your side seams together, and you're just going to stitch down the length from the waist. So from the top of the waist, you're going to go jump all the way down to the hemline and back stitch. And you'll do that on both side seams. Needle in, lift and pivot. I hope you are all enjoying our little sew along. It's getting exciting now as we get near to being able to start gathering up our waistlines. So once we've done this, we'll be starting to gather up the waistlines, and then we're making the elastic, attaching the elastic, and then we're almost on the home stretch by doing our hems. Okay, so you see I made a little mark there. So I'm going to stitch to that mark, reverse a little bit. So I'm stitching to that mark, and then I'm reversing just enough so that I can get my seam allowances underneath. So lift the presser foot. This is very tricky with one hand. Okay, so I'm going to need to finger, I'm just pushing my seam allowance underneath on this side. I'm getting my seam allowance underneath. No man, what am I talking about? Sorry, start again. I don't have anything I can make this hold on to. Okay, so sorry, we're going to go back, and so leave your needle in. We're going to turn, we're going to stitch up a little bit. My apologies, stitch up a little bit. There we go, to there. Lift and then push your seam allowance underneath the presser foot, and I'm using my scissor underneath to get it underneath my presser foot. Stitch to the little marker over here, lift, no, this way. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch up a teeny bit. Okay, and then turn all the way back. So basically we're just back stitching that corner of the pocket all the way down, stitching back on your 1.5 seam allowance, so all the way back down to the hemline. Okay, and then once we've got to the hemline, we're going to press those seams open, and then we're going to overlock them closed. All right, so I don't have my pins in. How are we doing, everybody? I mean, you're doing so well. We started at 7:30, so we are 2 hours in. It shouldn't take us too much longer to finish. So just stitch all the way down to the bottom. I'll put my iron on. All the way down to the bottom. And we're then going to press those seams open. Okay. Right. Just be careful that you don't cut your gathering at the top when you're trimming off these little threads. You just want to make sure you're snipping off your threads. Okay, perfect. Good stuff. Okay, so just press those seams open again. So it's mainly the bottom of the skirt seams that we need to press open. So the side seams. So if you're not putting in the pockets, then I know we've spent a large part of the lesson on pockets and gathering. Excuse me, but you'll be pressing your side seams open and overlocking them closed. Okay, so again, you'll be switching to your overlock stitch or using the overlocker, whichever you feel comfortable doing. Okay. So I'm going to press open my side seam. pleased that it did start to warm up again this week. It was rather bitterly the last week, but it was very nice to get to enjoy the snow. I must be honest, when it's cold and you have the snow, it kind of makes it worthwhile. You don't feel too bad. But when it's just freezing and there's no snow, you feel rather cheated. Well, I do after. Okay, so seams pressed open. Now we are going to overlock the side seams. So effectively what we're going to be doing is overlocking the entire side seam. So we're going to come down, turn and overlock the entire pocket bag. When we get to the bottom over here, we're literally just going to link in. So we're just going to link into that seam and then continue down. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to start off at the top with my overlocker, and hopefully you can see a little bit. And I'm going to stitch down. Now I'm going to show you this, because with an overlocker, so if I had to continue, I'm going to cut straight into my pocket bag. So this is a nifty little trick if you have got an overlocker. I take my corner here and I pinch it like that. And then I continue to stitch. So I'm feeding my pocket bag into my overlocker, on keeping my seam allowance on the edge. Okay, I'm going to have to just, this is tricky with one hand, lift and squeeze that underneath. Okay, and here again we have another corner too. So I want to make sure that nothing is underneath. But again, I'm pinching and I'm pushing it toward the edge. Like so. There we go. And all the way down the length of the seam. Just want to make sure that's... This is incredibly tricky with one hand, so I'm doing my best to try and show you as best I can. Okay, super. So look at that for a finish. So really nice and neat, all the way around the little pocket bag. Okay, then round, oopsie. Ooh, sorry. And then round and down. Okay. There we go. So we've got a little pocket. So do the same on the other side seam. Oh, sorry. There we go. So we're going to do the other, do the same on the other. So you'll overlock stitch the other side seam. Overlockers sometimes can be seen as quite scary things, but they're only scary because they've got a blade that can cut into your garment if you're not careful. But they really do give you such a professional finish. And once you know, you kind of build up a relationship with your overlocker, there's no going back really. Okay, so I'm just going to do that little corner again. Around the pocket bag. And I mean, this is great for, overlockers are great for fabrics that fray that fray a lot, or even for things like sweatshirts and things like that. You can sometimes even use the stitches decoratively in your okay, right. So I hope that this is behaving itself, because it's telling me to rotate my camera. That is our pockets stitched, overlocked, and on the other side stitched and overlocked. So now we are going to take our elastic. Okay, so we're going to prepare our elastic. So we're going to create a circle from our elastic. So Yes, we'll do that, and then we can finish off with the hems. Because it might be that you want to adjust your hem length once you've actually fitted on your skirt. So I'd say we'll do the waistband, and then you can, I'll show you how to do the hem, but then you'll need to just double check the length. So put it on and double check the length before you finish off your length itself. So your waistband, okay, so the elastic is stretchy, okay. My daughter's waist was 57 centimeters. Now, if I take 57 centimeters and stitch the two together, so I've cut this a little bit bigger for 60 centimeters, because this is going to get stretched onto the waistband, onto the waist of the skirt. So if she measures comfortably 57, you don't want this to be too tight. So you can decide, you know, put it around yourself and just get the measurement exactly how you want it. I am going to take, so if her waist is 57, I'm going to cut to 50, her waist is 57, I'm going to cut to, to 60, because I'm going to sew away 3 centimeters, effectively 1.5, 1.5. So you're going to sew a seam allowance. So you'll need your waist measurement plus 3 centimeters, which is what I said in the little description. And that's your seam allowance, because then it measures to your waist. If you want it tighter, then take a little bit more. It's just that I didn't want people to buy elastic and not have enough. So at least then you can adjust and make it exactly the measurement that you are wanting. So I've done Elizabeth's to the right measurement. So I'm going to stitch them together. So basically we're going to put a pin in and out. So we want to keep the edges together, top and bottom. Okay. And I'm going to stitch down just on a straight stitch. Do a good back stitch at the beginning and at the end of the tape, of your elastic, should I say, sorry. Okay, and then snip it off. Okay. Now you might want to change your top color of thread at this point, depending on the color elastic that you are using. So I'm going to switch over to a black thread, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so you'll see I've done my seam there. I'm going to now sew down each side of that seam and then trim away the excess lurex. Okay, and then we will put the, I just need a black thread. So we're going to change over just so that you can put your elastic on. And then I have, I think, just enough hopefully to do the hems. So you can leave your bottom thread in, okay? So because we're going to be stitching the elastic on from the top. So this is really about just preparing your elastic so that it's ready. And then we're going to quarter our waist, elastic band waist measurement, okay? So we're going to quarter that, put in a few pins as markers. Then we're going to draw up our skirt fabric to the hip measurement, or approximate hip measurement plus a little bit extra. And then you'll see how much fullness you have in your skirt. Okay, nearly there. Okay. Now I've got the black, I've put black on, and now I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to place my presser foot here, and I'm going to stitch down the length on each side, and then I can trim away the excess. So presser foot on the edge, forwards and backwards. Now I'm using a straight stitch because that will allow the elastic still to stretch at this point. When I come to attach the elastic to the skirt, I'm going to then change it to a different type of stitch, which I will show you on my machine. Okay. Okay. And just do the other side. And as I say, this is just to strengthen the elastic waistband. Okay. How are we doing, guys? Are we enjoying? We're nearly there now. The pockets take quite a lot of time because there's a few steps. But as I say, it's worth it if you like a pocket. So, you can see now the back, I've done the 2 rows of stitching on each side, okay? And that's helping, you see my elastic can still stretch, but at least it's keeping it down. I'm now just going to trim off the excess, okay? Not too close to my stitching line, but just enough to get, there we go. Okay, so that just neatens up the back of the waistband. So that is going to be our center back, okay? Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Oh, that's okay, don't worry, Sally. So we're going to place a little pin in the middle of the back, okay, in my center back. And I'm going to take that center back and I'm going to fold it like that. And I'm going to travel down together to find the fold over here. Now this is my center front, okay, so placing a pin inside, that is my center front, okay. So now what I'm going to do is take my elastic and meet my center front and my center back together like that. So that means that on this side of the fold, that is giving me my side seam, okay. And this is creating, it's breaking my waistband up into quarters. So from here to this side, another pin. Okay, so we now have, so if I pull that like that, we have 4 pins. We've got our center back, center front, side seam, side seam. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to do, is to basically quarter your elastic. And we're going to do exactly the same. So we've marked our skirt with a center front and a center back with the pins like so. So we're now going to gather up, okay? So I want to hold this point and I'm going to take one, I'm going to take just this lot of threads here and I'm going to draw up. So I'm going to do it this way so you can see better. So I'm going to draw up my bobbin threads now. So again, just make sure you're holding just your bobbin threads. And I'm going to slide along. Don't pull too hard. If you pull too hard, you could snap one of these threads and then you have to start all over again. And then, so with these fingers, you're just moving the gathers up a little bit. Okay, so I'm showing you the wrong side because you at least can see the threads being pulled along. So I've got to gather up to this quarter, so moving this fullness along, and I find it works a lot better if you move it bit by bit, okay, so you don't try and move a huge amount of gathers in one go. Now Elizabeth's waist is 57 centimeters, so I'm going to guess that I'm going to allow, should I say, for her hips, I mean, she's straight up and down, but I'm going to allow for her hips. So if her hips did measure, say 65 centimeters, then I will allow 5 centimeters extra. So what we want to do is gather up your whole waist so that in total it measures about 5 to 6 centimeters more than the hip measurement. Okay, now that is just really to allow you to get it over your hips. Okay, if you want, you can make it a bit more. It's just that it makes it easier for us to then get the elastic on to the waist. So this is your hip measurement. So the skirt, you are going to gather up to your hip measurement plus 5 or 10 centimeters. Okay. You are definitely gathering using your bobbin threads. Yes, that's right, Claire. Okay, so I am going to, and then, okay. So I've just got to work out what the quarter of, what did I say, 50, 60, 65. So just do the math. Okay, so I can gather this up a little bit more. Okay, super. So, and then just tie a little a straight stitch. So sorry, Kay is just asking a question. When you're joining your elastics together, Kay, it's a straight stitch. So your first row, when you're putting them together right sides facing, is you're sewing a straight stitch, a straight row stitching, and then they go open either side of that row, and you do 2 other straight rows of stitching. Okay, so effectively there's 3 rows of stitching. So you can see I've gathered up 1 little quarter. So now I'm going to gather up this other half of my skirt. Now I'm really hoping I'm going to get to see some of these finished products in the next few days. So if I know there's some of you that are watching along and aren't sewing along, but you will at a later stage, and that's fine, but I would love to see your finished skirts. So please do send me some pictures or comment or post on my page. It would be lovely to see. Okay, so let me just check my measurement. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit tighter. Okay, once you've got your desired amount of gathering, you're going to just knot the end of the gathers. So you see it can't go beyond that point. Okay, so you're going to knot it off like that, and then it can't continue to unravel. So if I show you this side like that. Okay, so I've knotted it now, so I can shimmy these along because I want my skirt. Remember, I'm working with the quarters. So so I'm wanting to have 32. So this needs to measure 32.5, which it nearly is. If I'm wanting to make Elizabeth's hip measurement 65. Okay, so I want to just ease that out. Oh, that's looking quite pretty now. Look at that. So I've got to rouge up the other side. Okay, so this side here. So I've done, you see, all of that got gathered into that. Okay, so you can see it takes a lot of fabric, but that's obviously if you want it nice and full. If you are happy with having a skirt that's less full, I know Ronnie, you wanted a more A-line effect. It won't be this full at all, but you still want to kind of gather up your waist just a little bit so that you can, it makes attaching the elastic easier. Okay, how are we doing? Who else is rouging up your elastic? Your gathers, sorry. I'm just going to knot this side again so that I've got a starting point, and then I can rouge back that way. And I'm going to rouge up from this side. So once you get the hang of it, it's just a case of sliding that fabric down the threads like that. So if you're holding onto your gathers like this, just ease them along, okay? And then you pull on these threads and you just hold the fabric and you see how it rouges up. Okay, so to work out the measurements for, I'm going to go over the elastic quartering first, and then I'll go over the measurements for gathering up, and then I'll go back to the gathering. So if you have done your elastic now, you're going to fold your center back in half, and then you fold down to the first fold like that. This becomes your center front because you've got a center back and a center front. You then place your center front and center back together like that, okay? And then the fold that follows here is your side seam. And if you hold your center front and center back together, the fold that comes on this side is your other side seam. So that's how you get your quarters. Okay, so we've got 4, it's really hard to, there we go, 4 pins, okay? So center back, center front, side seam, side seam. Is that good, Kay? Okay, and how many centimeters on top of the hip measurement? Okay, so depending on your hip measurement, I would say it'll just depend on you. You want to make sure that your skirt's going to be able to come up and down over your hips easily. So you want between 5 and 10 centimeters above your hip measurement. Okay, so I've only done 5 for Elizabeth. So her hip measurement plus 5 centimeters. But it could be between 5 and 10 centimeters, whatever you want it to be really. It's all we're trying to do is reduce the volume, so the entire circumference of your skirt waist on the fabric. We're trying to reduce that down to your hip measurement plus a little extra so that we can then stretch the elastic onto that hip measurement. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. It will when I demonstrate the next step. So I'm just going to finish gathering up this part of the skirt, and I just want to make sure that they are the same. And I'm going to tie again a little knot to stop my gathers from coming apart. Okay, so there we have the wrong side of the waist. Okay, and I'm just going to check my measurement. Okay, so all in all, we have 65. And we've got 60 on the waist. Okay, so remember when we started, before we started rouging up our gathering, we used a pin and we set out the center of the skirt front and the skirt back. So we put a pin in the center. Okay, so now this is where we are now going to meet up our quarters. Now Elizabeth's hip and waist measurement are quite close together. She's quite, as I said, straight up and down. So it might be that you have more to stretch onto your waist, will stretch more onto your hip measurement. It just depends on your body's ratio, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and tilt the camera just to show you a bit better, so hopefully you can see. So I have my skirt waist measurement here now, okay, and I've got my band, all right. Now what you could do is once you are happy with the waist measurement, you can overlock edge, the edge of this, okay? Because what we're going to be doing is actually taking our band and placing it over the seam like that. So we're actually going to be covering all of that gathering like that. And we're going to attach the waistband onto the skirt in quarters. So I know that my side seam here where my pocket bag is, I know that this is a quarter. I am going to quickly overlock this, but just to give you kind of the heads up, we're going to start by placing our center back pin and center back band together like so. And then you're going to stretch your waistband onto the side seam. So if you can see here that my skirt is a lot bigger than my waistband. So by stretching your elastic, okay, it then will meet your waistband. We put in a couple extra pins and then we whiz round with the sewing machine. So I'm going to leave my pins in there for now, and I'm going to just overlock the edge. I'm going to just move this pin over. Now if I'd overlocked this before, it would be very full, so it would be very, very wavy, okay? You could overlock it in advance, but it does mean that then it's literally, you've got a row of stitches on top of the edge of the fabric, and that's getting gathered, so it's becoming more bulky. Whereas if we overlock them now that you've kind of set your hip measurement, you're then keeping all those layers together, so it gives you a neater finish, and it's also helping keep the gathers together. So I'm literally just going to whiz around the edge. I'm going to invert this pin. I think I did mark it. Yes, I marked it with my friction pen on the reverse side for my center front and center back. So I'm just going to make that a little bit darker, because if you go over a pin through your overlocker, you will damage the blade and you'll have to replace your blades, and that can become quite costly. So I'm going to start off just overlocking the edge of the waistband, and we're just going to go all the way around. I'm happy with how I've gathered everything up. It's nice and even, so I'd say that's kind of your key, just making sure it's all nice and even. And I'm now just overlocking the edge of the waist. So you'll see that this is keeping them nicely together, and it's nice and flat as well. So again, it just gives you a nicer finish. Okay. All the way around. Okay. Nearly there. How are we doing, everybody? So, okay, Sarah Jane's asking a question. So your fabric measurement is your hip measurement onto the elastic. Yes, so you're gathering up your waist of the skirt to your hip measurement plus a little bit extra. Just allow a little bit extra, as I said, about 5 centimeters. So if your hips measure 95 centimeters, you're going to gather up the waists together to 100 centimeters, and then that you're going to quarter. So your side seam and side seam will be a half, and your center front and center back will be a half, and then we stretch the elastic from quarter to quarter all the way around the waistband. But you want to make sure that by finishing off the edge of the fabric, whether it's overlocking it with an overlocker or with the overlock stitch on your machine, that again is just to see how it neatens up the edge of the skirt like so, and it's going to stop that from fraying in the wash. Because what you don't want is you've spent all this time making this beautiful skirt that you're going to wear heaps in summer and you're going to need to wash it a lot, so you put it in the wash and suddenly it starts fraying beyond the elastic, you'll be devastated. So just tidy up the seam by overlocking all the way around. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Natalie, check her waist in the morning. That's no problem. It's just, I think if you see how we attach the elastic, because that will be your next step. That's okay, Michelle, but I'd like to know if you've replaced your needle, is it behaving itself now? Is it working? Okay? Because Michelle asked a question earlier about needles, about why thread would snap while she was sewing in the same place, and I suggested it might well be the needle. So yeah. Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, so right, I'm going to turn this the right way around. Okay, so ta-da! We're almost there, girls. So this is the part of the skirt that is going to get attached to the waistband. So I'm going to, there's my marker there, just put the pin back in. Okay, so I'd say that this is probably, I know we did the pockets, but this is probably the trickiest part in terms of stretching your elastic onto the waist. Okay, so I'm going to tilt this down. Michelle says yes, it was the needle. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Michelle. That's a tip for all of us. Check your needles. If your thread is snapping, check your needles. It might be that it's blunt. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take my first marker here. So this is going to be so I've got my pockets either side over here and here. Okay, so I've got my center front and my center back pins. So I'm going to start with my center back. Okay, it doesn't really matter which side you're going to make your center front or center back. So there's my seam there, and there's the pin for the middle there. So match those two together and place, feel like I'm all thumbs, and place the pin in through the fabric. Okay, so center matched up. Come along to your side seam. So here is my physical side seam over here. So I'm going to place my elastic on the side seam like so, and I'm going to pin the skirt to the elastic. Okay, so if we see my elastic needs to stretch for the waistband to fit, the hip measurement to fit my waist of my skirt. So this sometimes I have a lino table, so put your hand on, weight it down, stretch it, and then pop in another pin. Put your hand down, stretch it, and pop in another pin, like so. So you can see now I'm popping my pins in along the width of the waistband. Okay, so that's helping hold my waistband to the skirt. So I'm going to now match up my next quarter. So here's my next pin with my next pin. Okay, so this is my center front or center back. Hold them together and push a pin through. So I know I've got to stretch this onto this. So try and do this over here. So I'm going to put my hand on this pin and weight it down, and then I can grab this pin and stretch, and then with this hand push the pin through. I would say this is probably the trickiest bit. So you can see, look, there we go. I've got a centralized pin now. Hold down, stretch, and push another pin through the elastic. So we can see now that this is starting to take shape. Hold, stretch, and push your pin through. Okay, so we can see I've done half the waist so far. There we go. So just got to do the other half. So I'm going to take my pin for my side seam, and I'm going to match it up to my side seam over here, like that. and push the pin through like so. So now I've just got to stretch this little bit here. And as I said, you know, you might have more to stretch on. So you might have a greater ratio. So I'm going to stretch and push my needle through. So I do middle and stretch and push another needle through. Last little one, stretch, push my needle through. Okay, so I can see my elastic is getting attached to the waistband, which leaves me the last little quarter just to stretch on because we've done the other three. So hand on, stretch, push my needle through, hand on, stretch the two together, needle through. Is this making sense, guys? Are you able to see? Have you been able to see what I've done here? If you can let me know. So if I need to at this stage, then I can come back and demonstrate again from the other side of the camera. Are we all good? Okay. So I think what we're going to do next is our stitching. Okay. So we are going to change the setting on our machine to an elasticated stitch. Okay, so I'm going to show you the elasticated stitch on my machine. So it is a kind of broken up zigzag, number 16. Okay, so that's what it looks like. It looks like a zigzag, but it's broken up. Okay. So I'm going to change the setting on my machine. Okay, so I've selected number 16 and I'm going to just change the width a little bit to make it a little bit narrower, so it's not too wide. And I'm going to probably bring the stitches up a little bit more. Okay. So we are now going to stitch this on, and we're going to start from the center back. So I'm just looking for my center back. Where's my center back? Where's the join? Ah, there it is. Okay, so we're going to start with the center back, and I'm going to pop it onto my machine like so. And I'm going to place my presser foot on the edge of the fabric like that, on the edge of my elastic, sorry. Now I'm going to need 2 hands to do this, so I'm going to try my best to explain. But what you're going to need to do is hold at the front and stretch, and hold at the back and stretch at exactly the same time. Okay, so the idea is that you're going to be stretching them together. I know I've got a little thingy here, so I'm going to try and use this one to see if this might work. Trying all these different camera things. So let's have a go at this and see if it's going to work. Because if I can get this to work, then, yeah, is it going to behave? Right. Let us try. Okay. Right. Okay, this might not really work for very long, but hopefully you will be able to just see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to take my needle out, and I'm going to hold and stretch my elastic back and front. Okay, I'm just going to go slowly first to check I'm happy with the elastic stitch. There we go. Okay, so stretch it both front and back, but you're going to move both hands towards the presser foot, if that makes sense. So you're creating tension, but then you're moving towards the presser foot at the same rate. Okay, so I'm going to take out my next pin, I'm going to make sure everything's nice and flat underneath. Pinch at the back, pinch at the front. Okay, and stretch. So you'll see, even though I'm stretching my fabric, I'm moving it towards the presser foot at the same rate. Okay. Did I alter my needle? Ideally, yes, you want to change over your needle. I've got an 80-12 universal in at the moment, and it's not really affecting my elastic. If it had pulled the elastic, then I would have switched over to the Microtex, but it's actually doing the job fine. So it's a brand new needle, so it is very sharp. So that's probably what's helping it. So just stretch and stitch as you go. As I said, the key is to make sure that when you are stretching, you're keeping that tension, but you're moving with the speed of the feed dogs of your machine. Okay, so I hope that that helps. And really, once you've gone all the way around, then it's just a case of us stitching the hem length. So I'll kind of explain to you what you're going to need to do to prepare your hem length. I am assuming you're going to want to finish your waistband, try it on, check the hem length, and then actually stitch it. So we have probably another 10 minutes tops, and we will be done for this evening. I can't believe it. So just keep stretching that elastic. So I'm going to do it from here as well, and see, maybe you can see what I'm doing from this aspect. So stretching both front and back, and stitching. Pinch front and back, stretch it, and just stitch. Okay. Ow. Be careful for the pins, you don't prick yourself. So just keep checking underneath the presser foot that nothing is too skew or folded up. So pinch, stretch, and stitch. Needle in, always leave your needle in when you are taking your pins out. So stretch. Okay. How are we doing, ladies? So making my gathers nice and flat and stretching. Okay. And stretch. Okay. I'm nearly there. Now, this technique of quartering the skirt and quartering the elastic, so your elastic was smaller than the waist, and effectively the waist of the skirt we did bigger to the hip measurement. If you were attaching a neckband to a sweatshirt or a t-shirt, you would apply exactly the same principle in terms of the quarters. Okay, so you would find your center back, find your center front, give yourself your other two halves, your other two quarters, should I say, and do the same on the other garment and match them up. Yes, we are, Nancy, we are attaching the elastic with the elasticated zigzag. So it's a zigzag stitch that's broken. So it's a zigzag, but it's like a straight dashed zigzag, if that makes sense. So that allows the elastic to stretch a bit more than just a straight zigzag. Okay. So I'm stretching both sides. I'm nearly there. Oh, I think Elizabeth's going to love this. Okay. Just coming up to the end now. How are we doing? Are we doing okay, guys? Last little bit. Stretch your elastic and stitch on. nice little back stitch. So that is the elastic onto the skirt. Okay, so I'm going to show you what that looks like from the right side. So I used a black thread. You can see it a bit better as well. Okay, and so there we go. So you can see it's a zigzag. Let's go this way. So you can see it's a zigzag, but it's kind of 1, 2, 3 stitches, turn, 1, 2, 3 stitches. So it's a stretch zigzag stitch. Now remember I said Lizzie's wasn't, her waist and hip measurement were not that different from each other. And then that is what it looks like on the wrong side of the waistband. So you can see how that overlocking helped to neaten up that edge. Okay, and we've used our full seam allowance. I just need to snip off the little bits of thread. Okay, so but you can see that, you know, we've now got quite a full little skirt, and we've got these delightful little pockets in the side, okay, which I'm sure she's going to absolutely love. So you've got the little pocket on the inside, and so now it is literally just a case of doing the hem. Okay, so what you will do is you will straighten off the hem measurement. So you might want to put it on and double check that you're happy with the length of the hem. And what I would say you need to do is then trim down. So make sure that whatever you take off the hem allowance, it's the same measurement all the way around. Okay, but do make sure that you have a 2 centimeter hem allowance. If you want to, if you're making it for a growing child, you might want to have a deeper hem allowance. So what you would do is you would turn over, say, 1.5 centimeters, and you'll give it a press. And if you wanted to make it, as I say, you want a deeper hem so you could let it down, then turn up 5 centimeters or 4 centimeters or 3 centimeters, doesn't really matter. I'm going to check this with Elizabeth tomorrow, but I'm going to fold over a 1 centimeter hem allowance and press it all the way around, and then fold it over again and press it all the way around. And then I'm going to be sewing just with the machine, so I'm not going to use my hand. I'm not going to do a hand hem. It'll be out in minutes. I'm then going to sew with the machine on the edge of the fold like that, all the way around. So really it's folding over your hem allowance and then a second hem allowance if you want a narrow hem. If you want, as I said, a deeper hem, allow yourself 1.5 centimeters and then a further, or 1 centimeter and a further, whatever turning it is that you want. So I don't know if anybody has any questions before we kind of wrap up this evening's session. I hope that you really have enjoyed yourself and that you've learned a couple new skills that you'll be able to apply to other projects. And I'm going to just hang on a little bit in case there are any questions. The next sew along is going to be taking a vest top. So if you've got a vest, so a sleeveless vest, or it could be that you want to do a strappy top, you know, like a little, if you want to make like a little camisole, we're going to be working with stretch fabric. Okay, so it's going to be a little session on how to make the pattern and how to cut out the jersey fabric, and then how to stitch it all together. So it will be a little bit probably more faster paced, but then at least, you know, you'll have a summer vest to potentially go with your summer skirt. But I hope that you really enjoyed this evening's session. Thank you for joining along. It's been really nice to see your messages popping up along the session. And those of you who are sewing now later, watching this back on YouTube, I hope to see your finished skirts, and hope you all have a fantastic week. Until next time, one question. How do you know where to place the elastic? Sorry, so I've just got a couple questions coming through. So how do you know where to place the elastic? So your elastic is placed 1.5 centimeters below the overlocking. So in other words, you want to just cover, you want to make sure that you're covering your last row of gathering stitches. So, okay. So yeah, send me messages if you have any questions. I'll try and reply to them. But otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed. I have ordered the rose gold elastic waistband fabric, so waistbanding. So that is coming back in, and I'm going to try and get this on YouTube in the next day, or within the next day if I can. Hopefully it's going to save. So that's what it comes down to, if it's going to save. So I hope you've had fun. It's been lovely spending the evening with you and having some me and you sewing time. So have a lovely week and a weekend ahead, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.